Hi, I'm Jonna Till Johnson, CEO of Nemertes, here with my co-host, John Burke, the CTO of Nemertes, and you're listening to Heavy Strategy, the show that tries to ask the right questions, not give the right answers. Today, we're going to talk about the difference between a strategy and a list of projects, which I think is fascinating, John, because I do think a lot of times IT folks conflate the two.
Oh, absolutely. And I know, speaking from lower levels in the organization than the ones that got to actually define the strategies, that a lot of times there was such a long shopping list of projects either already in motion or known to be coming down the pike that defining a strategy seemed like an afterthought because basically all of IT's time was going to be consumed by doing the things we knew we had to do. So, why are we having this strategy planning meeting? What is this about? Why bother? Yeah, I get that perspective totally.
Well, and I think one of the simplest answers to the question, why are we having this strategy meeting, is to tell us which of the projects we can shoot or downgrade. And that's incredibly important because IT, I don't think, really feels like it has the authority to downgrade something. It's kind of a service organization that must do everything requested of it is kind of the mindset. And what we're really talking about is switching that mindset to a key component, a pillar of the organization that enables the organization to reach its business goals. But like any other pillar, like the chief financial office, the sales, you can't do everything. You've got to decide what thing you can do. And so I would say
Absolutely.
yeah.
I think that's a really great thing to bring up because, like, the CFO doesn't allow the financial strategy of the company to be defined by what everybody's asking for.
Exactly. And in fact, that's a common problem in organizations that don't have a strategy is, and here's a fun checklist for you to determine whether you have a strategy or are just talking about it. First of all, if in your strategy meetings you never, ever, ever talk about what you can shoot, you don't have a strategy, just a project list. And the second thing that tells you is if you let every component of IT craft a wish list and your budgeting process is to send the unadulterated wish list to finance and let them make the decisions, you don't have a strategy.
And your role in the organization is pretty questionable if all you're doing is rubber stamping what other people are telling you that you should do and then passing it along to get funding or not. Yeah. Uh, no, I think the problem is sometimes a lack of a good understanding of what a strategy means. And, we're constantly harping on the idea that a technology strategy has to be growing out of a business strategy. You can't define one in a vacuum. You can't say, well, these are all the really cool things that are happening out there in the world, and here's this new standard, and we should just be doing these things, and here are the projects that'll get us there. That doesn't fly because that's not about being an IT department in a business or a university or whatever. That's about being an IT department in a vacuum. And of course, nobody has an IT department freestanding. So you gotta be paying attention to what the business is trying to accomplish and how the business is trying to accomplish it before you can define a technology strategy that will support it.
I completely agree with you. I would also say when you said nobody has the luxury of a freestanding IT department, I started immediately thinking about, the Defense Department and various government agencies that literally are chartered with go find us something that might be useful. And I think that's about as close as you can ever get to having a freestanding IT department. Yet even then, your constant challenge is determining what your government clients will believe is useful. If you look at the original ARPANET, contrary to common folklore, it wasn't the case that a bunch of technologists were told to go out and build a network that was resistant to nuclear attack. There were a bunch of scientists screwing around trying to figure out how to connect their computers so they could share data. And somebody on the ARPA side said, hey, this is a cool, interesting architecture that could potentially solve a problem that we've got in our hip pockets. So yeah, that's a slight digression into how strategies can evolve organically. Sometimes it is important to just look at everything that might be out there, but you always need to do that curation that says which of the anything that's out there is going to be most interesting to us.
Right, exactly. And you need to make sure that us is defined as the entire organization and not just IT. There's this
Yeah.
phrase that we use all the time. Something got thrown over the wall to us, and again, that's making the implicit assumption that IT's this thing. We've got our walled garden and we're doing our IT stuff with perfect abandon. And then somebody chucks a project over the wall, like, an abandoned puppy or something. Those are left at the front doors, not chucked over
Yeah,
walls.
please don't chuck puppy. No puppy chucking here, John.
No puppy chucking. Sorry, I do not endorse puppy chucking. Neither does Nemertes research. There's still that implicit separation, like you're in a walled garden and people are just intruding on it and messing your stuff up by chucking things over the wall into it, like discarded beer cans. And that is not the case. You exist as a function to advance the activities, purposes, and goals of everything that's outside that wall. So, if you're going to have a proper IT strategy, that isn't just a list of projects you can't dodge, plus whatever's left over being devoted to the projects you really want to do. No, you got to tear the wall down, and you got to be making your plans in IT based on the plans of the business. I can say that like 6 other ways, and I'm sure I will before this is over.
Well, I think that's true, but if anyone's listening, they're probably going, yeah, easier said than done, John and Jonna. And I think part of the problem is because the vast majority of people, IT and otherwise, do not think strategically. That's not a bad thing. It's just a fact. And so part of the challenge in deciding what it is that we as IT need to be doing to advance the business is understanding who in your business user community is thinking strategically and who isn't, and address them both. If the head of sales is saying, look, I need this feature on Salesforce and I need it tomorrow because I can generate $10 million more revenue a month if I have it. Well, yeah, that's pretty important. Go do that. But that is not strategic. But if someone is saying, okay, we need to be investing in quantum computing because I would like to solve this problem that I can't see solvable in any other way, shape, or form, and I believe quantum computing can do that. I'm not saying that you need to jump into quantum computing. I'm using it as an example. But it is something where you need to listen to both that dreamer and the person who's, firmly planted with his feet on the ground saying, hey, give me the features I need.
Absolutely. You got to be tracking where the puck is going to go. To use a hockey analogy, I do actually understand. I'm sure there are plenty that I don't. But yeah, the goal of an IT strategy is to be skating to where the puck is going to be by the time you get there. And you got to have an idea of where that is based on, yes, those forward thinkers in the business parts of the company. In the other functional departments, HR, finance, whatever, there's going to be, or there ought to be, people in there who have their eyes on the long term. And we'll come back to what long term means in a bit. But right, you got to know who to pay attention to, and you got to be able to have frank conversations with the rest of leadership who need to be involved in distinguishing between the long-term dreamer and the short-term dreamer. The quantum idea is great, and if solving the problem that the quantum guy wants to solve is actually important to the future of the business, okay, start skating towards being able to use quantum when quantum becomes a usable thing. If, on the other hand, it's just one of those problems that maybe it'll be useful to solve it, maybe it won't, we won't know for some years yet, okay, then maybe don't pay so much attention. Whereas, obviously, putting another $10 million a month onto the bottom line is almost always seen as a good thing if you don't have to spend more than that to get it.
Exactly. But I do want to also highlight here that it still doesn't really answer the question, just sort of kicks the can farther down the road, because all we're really saying is IT, in order to understand what the business strategy is, you have to understand what the business strategy is, which is not super helpful advice. So let me turn this into something slightly practical, which is you've got to fundamentally understand the business you're in. And I'm going to go out and say some things that are maybe provocative, but I want to give an example of somebody who is universally venerated as a great strategist who absolutely screwed up on that fundamental question. And that's Elon Musk. And here's my example. Elon Musk took over Twitter. Great, fine. So Twitter is in the business, or was in the business, of converting eyeballs into money. Basically, that business was funded by advertisers who paid to get eyeballs for their content. That's it. That was the full thing. Now, what Elon Musk did as soon as he took over was pretend it was some sort of tech product generating company and begin immediately digging into what he saw as all the flaws of the technology. We can discuss and debate whether Twitter's code was good, bad, or indifferent. But the point was that was the wrong way to spend the one resource that even Elon Musk can't make more of, which is his own personal time. He should have been sitting there with every advertiser saying, what do you need so that you can give me twice as much money next month as you gave me last month? If he had done that, Twitter would be much more thriving now. It may be a different platform. So the point is that very simple understanding that this business is in the business of converting eyeballs to money, that's incredibly important to know. And even so-called visionaries sometimes don't really see it because you get clouded by your thoughts of what it ought to be.
I endorse that half-heartedly because I think there's a difference between like the mission of the company, what do we exist to do, and the income stream of the company. Where do our dollars actually come from? And that's probably just my background in higher education talking, because obviously the mission of a university is not to make money. The mission of a university is to educate people. But in point of fact, you don't stay in business or in operation if you don't make enough money to do so. So you can never lose track of how money actually comes into the university. And that turns out to be, butts in seats, or the philosophical equivalent thereof. You got to have classrooms full of people who are being taught, or who are learning, if you prefer the more active mode. And if you're not aware of that and paying attention to that, then you can put an awful lot of time into things that don't help either achieve the mission of education or the practical requirement of bringing the dollars in.
Well, that's an interesting example, John, but I want to come back to that. But first, I want to highlight a point that you made that I think is fantastic. Because if you're trying to put together a strategy, a technology strategy, one of the things you'll want to do is get clear on the mission and get clear on the business model and see if there are any gaps. Because if somebody had the ability to sit down to Elon Musk and say, look, I get that your vision is a, completely uncensored, free for all, whatever, that's great. But like, we have to keep the lights on and this is how we do it. Things might have gone a lot smoother for him. But I would also say a lot of times people's understanding of both the mission and the butts and seats, or in this case, and the practical part, the butts and seats, is flawed. Because when you were talking, I thought, actually, the perfect model for a university is you don't have any students at all. You just have various government agencies giving you grant funding. So then you don't have to do any of that messy teaching. You just sort of get money that's thrown at you to go do research, which is not unheard of. In fact, when Johns Hopkins, where John and I both graduated from, was first founded, that was their model. Their idea was they were going to get funding to do research, and they really didn't want to have undergrads. And so we had, one of the smallest undergraduate classes for any comparable university for many years. And I think it still is pretty small, relatively speaking. So the point there is not that that's a good thing or a bad thing. The point is, not only may the mission and the business model differ, but the stated business model and the actual business model, there may be some gaps. And if you're listening to this going, yeah, but that's not my job. I'm the IT guy or gal. Sadly, it is.
Well, if you're in IT leadership, absolutely, it's your job. You've got to be focused on what's the point of everything that you're doing in the IT shop, because just doing IT for IT's sake, while it can be a lot of fun, isn't a long-term good practice for your resume, your career.
Organization, yeah.
Yeah, it's a career-ending strategy for yourself personally.
Which is important. And actually, I want to circle back on this one more time because I want to go from the lofty, like visionary stuff to the practical. let's say you in IT have realized that the majority of your revenue actually comes, you're at a university, and the majority of your revenue comes from grants, not students. Then your customers, your major customers are the grantors, which means what do grantors actually want? So you should have strategic initiatives focused on looking at how you can measure the value of the investment that they've made in you, because that's really what grantors want. They want something that says, I gave you $1 million and you cured cancer or whatever. And so you might spend less on having interactive whiteboards in classrooms and more on tracking, making seamless tracking of grant funding. And the students may complain, but actually you're being loyal to the business model that you have at the university. And that's the kind of thinking you kind of need to do as an IT leader.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Things like granular accounting for the use of centralized and shared resources becomes hugely useful in that kind of a paradigm where your goal is to know and control the institutional overhead associated with acting on a grant versus not really caring so much about that if the goal is educating the students primarily. So yeah, I think that's a really excellent yardstick to keep in mind and reason for doing so. And I think IT folks need to also consider the position, the power that they have by virtue of the position that they're in, because they are basically the keepers and enforcers of technology standards and architectural standards and principles and requirements. So they may not be able to control whether or not the finance department, is going to pick SAP or whatever else is out there in competition with it anymore. And I'm happy to say I'm not that up on what the alternatives to SAP are these days. Glad I don't have to know anymore. But they can say, well, okay, whatever's going to come in, it's got to be able to do the things that let it fit into our environment correctly. So, we have to be able to use Okta or whatever it is to do authentication into it, because that's the security environment for this institution, and the institution has a commitment to this security environment, whatever. The point is you've got technology principles to live up to, and you've got technology requirements to meet, and those allow IT to exert influence on the projects, even that are just thrown over the wall to it at some point.
Well, and I would say yes, yes, yes. But before you even start setting those technology principles, you need to start with what the actual business drivers are.
Oh, yeah.
That includes knowing what business you're in versus knowing what the mission statement is versus knowing what business you think you're in. Again, the example of a university being an entity that returns value to grantors as opposed to an entity that educates students. You need to confront reality. The second thing is you need to understand how the current leadership wishes the organization to change in the coming years. So, for example, let's just take their arbitrary university. Does this arbitrary university want to grow its influence by launching lots and lots of satellite campuses that all are busily implementing the model of returning value to investors, and grantors? Or is it planning to grow by covering different areas? So maybe it was special. Maybe this was a university that focused solely on economics, but it decided to add a technology line or something like that. I mean, I'm exaggerating, but you get the idea. And so the next question is, what is the growth strategy of this organization? And it may be that there is no growth strategy whatsoever. There are some organizations that are in the process of winding themselves down, and there are organizations that are perfectly comfortable chunking along, and the only strategy is, let me do the same thing I did before, but make it more profitable year by year. And all of these are good. We're not casting judgment, but you need to know that because,
Right.
Again, at a very practical level, if senior leadership is thinking in terms of satellite campuses around the globe, you need to be thinking about what kind of network is connecting those, and also how you are enabling, for example, all the different languages and the translation for all the different languages, and interfaces for all the different governments that might be investing. If you're going to Europe, if you're going to Asia, are you planning to take investments from or grants from local entities and all those things? So essentially what you need to be asking yourself before you build out those technology principles is, what are we in business to do? Like, what's our mission? How are we doing it? What's our operating model? How is that different from what people say it is? I.e., is it really
Oh,
butts
yeah.
and seats or is it something else? And then how do we plan to grow where the answers might be not at all, by acquisition, organically, or some other more detailed thing? All of those are business drivers that should drive the selection of your technology principles, which drive the creation of the architecture. And
Absolutely. I'm going to circle back for once and just come back to that point about understanding how the sausage actually gets made institutionally, where the money actually comes from, and that example of research grants and funders and supporting them and getting good value back to the folks who are funding those projects. And just put my oar in for IT really taking that to heart. If that's the kind of organization they're in, whether it's something that's being funded by corporate clients who are just, looking for that next great ad, or by government clients who are looking for that next great cure for cancer. If you're not clear on the implications of that model, where the money comes in, the implications of that for how your business has to operate. And I'm thinking again of the idea of, well, if you're in a grant funded institution, keeping overhead low is critical because funders don't like to pay for overhead. And in some cases, there are laws restricting how much overhead they can pay for if they're government funders. Because not taking that into account can lead IT departments to set themselves a bunch of goals that ultimately put them at odds with that, because they increase overhead, they increase the spending in centralized parts of the budget and environment that the funders will not underwrite. And then you get into the funding crunch and where and how the heck are we going to pay for this? And it leads to frustration and anger and disillusionment in the IT departments. And it's great for our mental health if we don't set ourselves up for the frustration, disappointment, and disillusionment. So having a clear-eyed perspective on how your business actually works or how your organization is actually funded is really crucial to you being a happy person in IT and being able to have happy people working for you or with you.
well, and John, you came back to that twice, and I just want to reiterate it and underline it, because at the end of the day, and this is something that Heavy Strategy has really focused on. Yes, it's about what you can do for your organization, but at the end of the day, it's about what you do for you as well. And you need to create an environment where you feel that you are building great things that you fundamentally agree with building, and that your team is supporting you in this and that they understand what it is they're building. We've all heard the old story that, John, you like to repeat about the janitor who describes his job as building a cathedral, right? Because we're all pulling together, doing our one thing, but trying to create something great. The two further practicalities, one of the questions people will often ask is, well, this is all wonderful, but how am I supposed to know what the technology implications of our business strategy actually are? And the answer to that is you won't, because none of us are geniuses. And if even Elon Musk makes mistakes at times, we will too. But this gets back to your team. In that strategy meeting, you can actually use one meeting a quarter to do brainstorming where you say, okay, look, let's take this business driver that we all agree is a driver for our business. Get happier grantors, for example. Let's talk about what we can do as an IT organization to make that happen. What are some of the logical consequences of this as a driver for the projects that we put on that list and the projects we take off that list? And that'll help your team stay focused on the whole building a cathedral idea. And it also will generate ideas that you as a leader may not have come up with yourself, because you have a smart team. I hope you have a smart team. And
I think it's going to be important to keep in mind too that it may mean building an environment with rules that are not the same for everybody. For example, if you're in a a hedge fund or something that relies heavily on quantitative algorithms and the people who create them to actually generate revenue, your part of your IT strategy is do whatever it is to enable the quants in doing their work that you can do, and stay the heck out of their way whenever there's nothing you can do to positively enable them. And that may be not enforcing the same kinds of policies for them that you do for everybody else, or not cookie cuttering them into the same software environment as everybody else. There's always this sense, and you won't hear me quote the Bible often, but do not bind the mouths of the kind that tread the grain. There's always that sense of, don't monkey with the buzzsaw while it's cutting wood. You gotta keep an eye on those situations in your business or your organization as well.
Yes, and I do like the buzzsaw analogy. Is that because you're now living in the land of big mountains?
One of my spouse's students, when asked what they did well, said, "Well, give me a crosscut saw and I could cut wood all day long." So yeah, I think it's on my mind.
There you go. I think the last thing that people sometimes, well, actually, two more things I should say. The second thing is this kind of brainstorming is also a great use for AI, generative AI. Why? Because generative AI is fantastic at generating crappy ideas, great ideas, and everywhere in between. So if you plug in before that brainstorming session, ask the question, hey, what are some technology implications of, keeping our grantors happy or something like that? You're going to get some really stupid ideas, which you can toss out. You'll get some ideas that are provocative, which you may want to think about. And you might get one or two ideas that you might not have occurred to you, because that's what generative AI does. And what it can do is accelerate your ability to set that strategy, to organize around it. You're leaving the humans in charge of curating the final decision and saying, these are the connections that we think make sense. But AI is absolutely great at giving you lots and lots of ideas to choose from. And in fact, advertising agencies use it often as a way to jumpstart their brainstorming exercises.
I'll cautiously endorse that, just by pointing out that a lot of times all it's going to do is restate stuff that it's read somewhere else, basically, because that's all it does. But it can really help you to see an idea that you've heard stated many times, just stated in a different way. That can break the log jam and get things flowing.
Or it's possible you hadn't seen it before. It's that simple.
Yep.
I mean, There's whatever it is, 8.5 billion people on this planet. Maybe somebody actually thought of something and published it that you didn't see. And so that's the kind of thing that AI is great at. It's not going to come back and say this is absolutely positively the right way to do things, because it doesn't know that. It just tells you what everybody else is doing. And they could all be idiots, but at least it's something to consider. Last but not least, as I was about to get to, is what do you do if your business seems to constantly change its business drivers? All I can tell you is it happens. Sometimes it's a very good idea. Microsoft made this major pivot to go cloud-based, and it saved the company. So, now they're the first or second highest market cap, depending on which week it is. So they obviously did something right. Sometimes changes are necessary. If you're in an organization where they change their business model and change their business drivers week in, week out at a major way, so if they go constantly from B2B to B2C, or from making widgets to making services and flip back again, that's not an organization you'll be able to effectively put a strategy in place in. You just aren't, because you need to have some continuity, but you also need to be prepared for the idea that the business may change the strategy, and the drivers, and that's okay on a limited basis. So that's another question to ask yourself as you're spelling out the business drivers. How often in the history of your organization have they changed 100% or 180 degrees? And if the answer is a lot, then either you're not looking at true business drivers and you're confusing operational execution with business drivers, or you're in an organization where you can't really put in place a strategy. Firm up your resume and go somewhere else if you're a listener of this show, because you probably want to be doing strategy.
Yeah, making your IT strategy what's going to look best on my resume. it might be the only strategy you've got.
And with that, I think we've kind of come to the end of the discussion. Thank you for joining us today. Again, if you've got feedback or a follow-up for us on this topic, please send us a message at packetpushers.net/FU. No Snickers, that stands for follow-up. We all know that, right? We'd love to hear from you about your own experiences and your opinions and anything else. Also, at packetpushers.net, you will find the Network Break podcast, which helps you stay current on the latest tech news and what it means, and a whole lot more. If you want to talk to John or talk to me, please reach out to us at nemertes.com. That's N like Nancy, E-M like Mary, E-R-T like Thomas, E-S.com. We totally look forward to hearing from you.